Hey guys, JD here with the Kawasaki Ultra 310, and today I'll be showing you how to lubricate and service the steering pivot bushing. Warning: this procedure requires technical knowledge and special tools. Please consult a qualified Kawasaki watercraft mechanic or dealer before attempting to install this component on your own. Always refer to the official Kawasaki Watercraft Service Manual. Now, just to give you an idea, I try to do this before each of these maintenance videos. I'm going to give you an idea of the scope of this project. So we're going to remove the seats, we're going to remove the cover here, all of this hardware here, this cover, this all has to be unbolted. The handlebars, in my case, I just have this riser here. You will have to remove your handlebars. So first step is to get your seats out of the way, get the engine cover off of the ski. There's two bolts underneath this cover that need to come off the glove box. We don't need to pull the glove box out, but we need to loosen that hardware in the bottom of it. Remember, be careful with these. They are anchored into plastic, and they do tend, the little brass ferrule does tend to come loose. So if I have one of those happen, I'll show you how to deal with that and fix it. So remember, there's one in each cup holder. You have one right here. There's hardware right there. The bottom of the glove box. So I've showed this before. To remove the glove box, you just pull towards the stern of the ski, pop that out like that. There's a styrofoam liner in there. You're gonna push down on one side of it to get it to pop up a little bit. There's that styrofoam liner. We're gonna remove those. You don't have to actually remove the glove box, but you do have to loosen this hardware. So if you have a stock handlebar assembly, you're gonna have to remove all that. In my case, I have an aftermarket handlebar assembly. So for this, we're just gonna set it off to the side just like that. And then that's gonna allow us to lift all this up. You can see this all comes up. Here's I have this wired in. You can see there's two more 10mm acorn nuts. We gotta remove those. So you can see that access hatch is open now. And basically, now that I've loosened everything, you could lift up on it like that and get this out. As you can see, we've got a lot more to go. All right, so as you guys can see, I've got this whole portion lifted off. Now, a couple things I want to show you is these seals, you're gonna have to pull them off. They're gonna have to be, you can see there's that silicone there. We're gonna have to fix that. If you have a stereo system like this, any of the wire harness, if you have the stock stereo system, these are gonna go to your switch. We need to remove this connector here. That goes to the display. Oh, look at that, the rubber gasket popped off. This goes to the display, remove that. Any wires that are connecting the harness to this top assembly need to go. And we're gonna set this off to the side. So keep in mind, this whole upper assembly is going to come off of the ski. Now, aftermarket speakers, they could stay installed, but they do have to come off with this. So you have to make sure if you have aftermarket speakers, you're gonna disconnect the wire harness. Also, you're gonna disconnect the harness for your jog dial. Disconnect that like that. It's got a little push rivet holding it in place. You're gonna disconnect it like that. We're gonna disconnect this lead that goes to our amplifier. Now, if you look in here, you can see it's a little bit dirty. We're gonna clean all this up while we have it apart. We're just gonna leave all this harness right here. You can see I've got my aftermarket stereo, so all that harness has been disconnected. So now what we need to do is we need to disconnect these two control pods from the handlebar assembly, and we're gonna leave those in there. The risers right there. And then this whole top piece is gonna come off of the ski. We're gonna set it on the ground right there. This is quite a bit of work to do. But as you see, it can be done. It's not too difficult. Ensure that you do remove all the hardware. You can see there's a stud right up there in the front compartment. Make sure you loosen all those. Now, I did have a few that stripped out like this. There's the ferrule. It came out of the plastic. This is a common thing that happens sometimes when you take this apart. So I'm going to show you how we're going to get this ferrule off of the hardware here. We're going to put some epoxy on it. and we're gonna tap it back in. I've probably done that with like 4 of these over the times I've taken this apart. Once you epoxy them back in, they don't come out again, but it is kind of annoying that they do that. They come out of the plastic. All right, so we're gonna get these pods off. Obviously I have some aftermarket hardware here, so it's gonna look a little different than yours. So here's the right side control pod. We're gonna remove that. And these don't have to be removed from the ski. You just have to disconnect them from the handlebar, and we're gonna set them right in there. All right, so now we're gonna do the control pod on the other side of the handlebars. So you're gonna remove the handlebar assembly from the ski. As I said, I have an aftermarket one. Yours is gonna look different if you have the stock one. The stock one has some more padding on it and fairings that you'll have to remove. Then your control pods, just go ahead and set them down in there. And now our whole deck here is gonna be able to come off. So I'm gonna try to do this with one hand while I'm filming it to give you guys a perspective. Okay, so there you go. You don't have to remove the gull wing doors like they tell you to in the manual. That's an extra step. That's a waste of time. So you are going to have to remove this pneumatic strut that supports the gull wing door here. That's not rust or anything. That's just grease. I keep all that greased, and the grease is a little brown there if you were wondering. So for this, the top one, 10mm socket, the bottom one, to get to that there, you're going to have to use a 10mm box wrench, and you're going to have to loosen it. And so we're just removing the bracket here on the other side for the strut for the gull wing door. So whether you have an aftermarket or the stock steering riser, you're going to want to remove that as well. Okay, so this is a styrofoam insert that's right here that I just moved out of the way. So now this whole assembly can be lifted. Make sure your wire harness is not in the way, obviously. So I got to use 2 hands to do it, but I'm just going to show you how everything just comes up like that. You can see this whole thing lifts up. Okay, so you don't have to remove this from the ski, but you just need to set it in the side footwell like that, out of the way so that this panel here is clear. You can see how filthy this is. Look at all that corrosion on this steering neck. So I'm gonna take a second here to clean this all up. All this excess grease we're gonna clean up, and I'm gonna wipe all this down. Okay, so you can see we've got this whole assembly removed here. It's just pushed off to the side. It doesn't need to be removed from the ski because obviously you have your wire harness going through there. These are our control pods. I just kind of set them. They're just kind of dangling right there. This here is your breather for your fuel tank assembly. We're going to check that while we're in here. So while you have your ski apart to perform the maintenance on the steering pivot bushing assembly, I also highly recommend that you inspect and or replace the fuel filter bag as shown in the video here. I have another comprehensive video on doing that. The steps up to this point to unassemble the ski are exactly the same, so I do recommend that you check out that fuel filter video on my YouTube channel. So we're going to unassemble this here. We're going to take this off of the ski. We're going to lube all the components, check everything. This is a little bit tight. It's gotten a little bit tight on me. The components at the pump have been kept very lubed and in good condition. But this, we do get salt water, you know, over the handlebars, and so this assembly here is a little bit tight. So it's time for it to be unassembled and greased. So the first step is we're going to remove this safety cotter pin right here. So once you get the cotter pin out, then you're going to go ahead and loosen this nut right here. And this is a castle nut and a washer. And we're going to go ahead and remove those. Then this plate right here should come right up. You might need to give it a bit of a tap. And it should come off just like that. Now you can see all this salt that's in there. I washed the ski down really well, but even so, you could see all that salt that's built up in there. Next, using a 4mm Allen, you're gonna go ahead and loosen these 2 Allens right here that hold this plate assembly in place. Now there is a special Kawasaki tool designed for torquing and removing this knurled steering nut here. However, we're going to do this process without the special tool as it's really not needed. So this right here is the steering cable holder assembly. That's two 10mm bolts. We're gonna go ahead and loosen those. So here is our steering pivot assembly, and the steering cable was connected to this little ball here, and you can see this is pretty well greased up still from the factory, but it does have some rust forming on it. So I'm gonna go through, clean this component, clean everything up. We got to tap this out and then make sure that this whole assembly here, I feel a bunch of salt in there. We got to get that all cleaned up. So the next thing is you're going to go ahead and pull these bushings out of this assembly here. Now if you don't want to replace this gasket, you can do everything I'm showing you without removing this whole thing. So leave that seated in place, and you're going to have to go ahead and reach underneath in order to clean it and to work on it. So I am going to leave this seated in place because I don't want to replace the $28 gasket underneath, but I am going to show you now on the screen what that gasket looks like in case you want to replace it. Now I've gone ahead and pulled out this plastic bushing that goes in the top here. And then using a piece of emery cloth like this, soaked in corrosion block oil, we're going to go ahead and spray some of this into the bore. And then using this emery cloth, I'm going to fold it in half like this. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take some grease and apply a liberal amount into the bore there. Don't be shy. Then we're going to apply it onto the top of the surface here. We're going to put it in. Should go in very easily. And then before we reassemble everything, we're going to go ahead and grease this mating surface as well. I just don't want to get grease all over the place now. Okay, so we've gone through and we removed this bushing. We cleaned up the bore of the steering base plate assembly here. We cleaned everything up on that. As I stated, this is loosened, but I didn't pull this up because I don't want to break the gasket, which is $28. We disconnected the bracket for the steering cable right here, and we went ahead and lubed up that cable and the bracket assembly with some grease. You can see it sitting right down in there. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this steering shaft back into the assembly. Alright, so we've got that steering shaft back in. You can see how nice and loose that is. And now what we got to do is, before we put this main nut back in place, I'm actually going to clean it up just a bit. Get off any corrosion that's on there. So we're going to slather a whole bunch of grease onto this base plate here, and don't be shy with it. There you go. Get it on there too. Why not? Now there is a special tool that you can use to put this on. I am not going to use the tool because I think it's a waste of money. So, you know, you could see you tighten it just enough. You don't want it too tight. Next we have this lock ring here. That's going to go in place just like that. And then that was these two 4mm Allens. This right here is our steering assembly. This is what connects to that base plate right there. So make sure you're wearing gloves and get a lot of grease all over this. In fact, there shouldn't be any of the metal that's not coated in grease. And then this whole cable assembly, get the shroud right there. We're going to reattach this to the steering bracket. Now some people, if you're having a challenge with that, or if yours is seized on there from lack of maintenance, you are going to have to take this whole assembly off and there is a gasket. It's like a felt, like a paper gasket. So again, that's at your discretion whether or not you choose to replace that or not. All right, and then this bracket right here, we're just gonna line that up, and a little dab of blue Loctite on that one. Get those in place. So now we have this main assembly here, and then we're gonna add even more grease. Then there's our washer, and we're gonna add even more grease on top of the washer. And then here is our castle nut. All right, so as you can see here, we've got the whole pivot reassembled. We've got the castle nut and cotter pin back in place. And this moves nice and freely. And so now you're basically done with your steering pivot maintenance. And now the difficult part is to reassemble the entire ski, obviously in the reverse order that you took it apart. But anyway, I hope this was helpful. Check out my other video on changing the fuel filter. As I've mentioned, you do have to unassemble the same part of the ski in order to do both these maintenances. So I highly recommend that to save yourself time, you do the fuel filter at the same time you're going to do your steering pivot maintenance. Now this ski has over 150 hours. I think it's like 167 or something. So I waited quite some time to do this. And as you saw in the video, it did have quite a bit of salt crusted inside the bushing there. So it really is important to stay on top of that, especially if you ride in salt. Even if you don't ride in salt, it is good at least every other year to take that apart and to make sure it's greased up really well. So we've got our handlebar assemblies. So we're going to go through there. And we're going to line this up so all those studs come through. And there we go. Make sure to reassemble the ski the same way you took it apart. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more exclusive jet ski content, only on JD's Water World.